The Life of Jeremiah Farmer, Latin King's Enforcer. Jeremiah Farmer was once a feared enforcer in one of America's most notorious street gangs, the Latin Kings. Born and raised in Chicago, Farmer grew up in a city plagued by gang violence, poverty, and systemic inequality. From a young age, he was drawn into the world of crime, joining the Latin Kings, a powerful and hierarchical gang known for its strict codes, symbolic rituals, and violent reputation. By the 1990s, Farmer had earned a reputation as a brutal and loyal member of the organization. He operated primarily out of the Gary, Indiana, and Chicago area, regions long dominated by gang activity. As an enforcer, his job was to protect the gang's interests, intimidate rivals, and carry out violent orders handed down by higher-ups in the Latin Kings hierarchy. He was no small-time thug. He was a man feared even within the organization for his ruthless nature. In 1999, Jeremiah Farmer committed one of the most heinous acts of his criminal career. Seeking revenge over a drug-related dispute, Farmer brutally murdered two men, Marvin Pruitt and Harvey Seegers, in a calculated and savage attack. He cornered them in a basement, bludgeoning both to death with a hammer. This double homicide shocked the local community and led to a lengthy investigation that would eventually catch up to Farmer. Farmer was arrested and convicted, receiving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. He was sent to the United States Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, a high-security prison housing some of the nation's most dangerous criminals. But his story didn't end there. In 2019, Jeremiah Farmer made headlines again, this time for a shocking escape from the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Chicago. Along with another inmate, he used bedsheets to rappel down from a window, evading security in a bold and daring break for freedom. The escape prompted a nationwide manhunt and raised serious questions about security failures in the federal prison system. Farmer was captured days later, and his escape only added to his infamy. Farmer's life is a grim reflection of the violent world of gang culture. From his early immersion in the Latin Kings to his notorious crimes and prison break, he represents a generation lost to violence, vengeance, and institutional neglect. Today, he remains behind bars, an enduring symbol of the power gangs once held over America's inner cities. His story serves as a chilling reminder of how organized street gangs continue to influence young lives and how the consequences of that life often end in tragedy, incarceration, or death. Jeremiah Farmer, once a name whispered in fear, now lives out his days locked away, a relic of a violent past that continues to echo in the streets where he once ruled. The Life of Eugene Haywood, the rise and fall of a bomb squad enforcer. Eugene Haywood, once a feared enforcer for the notorious Bomb Squad gang, rose from the violent streets of Wilmington, North Carolina, during a time when drug wars and gang rivalries were at their peak. Known on the streets as a ruthless and loyal foot soldier, Haywood became a symbol of how power, crime, and violence collide in America's urban underworld. The Bomb Squad was no ordinary street crew. It was one of the most violent and organized gangs operating out of Wilmington in the 1990s and early 2000s. They were involved in everything from drug trafficking and illegal firearms distribution to violent assaults and targeted killings. Eugene Haywood was at the center of it all. Born and raised in the inner city, Haywood was no stranger to struggle. Like many youths in poverty-stricken neighborhoods, he was drawn into gang life by the promise of money, respect, and family. For Eugene, the Bomb Squad became his world. By his late teens, he had already built a reputation for being cold, calculated, and brutally efficient. As one of the gang's top enforcers, Haywood was tasked with carrying out violent attacks on rival gangs and suspected snitches. According to federal investigators, he helped enforce the Bomb Squad's rule through fear and intimidation. His name alone was enough to silence witnesses and send messages across the city's underworld. But with violence came attention. Law enforcement agencies had been tracking the bomb squad for years, and Haywood quickly rose to the top of their most wanted lists. Under the direction of the U.S. Attorney's Office, federal agents launched a series of investigations that would lead to a sweeping indictment of the gang. In 2013, Eugene Haywood was arrested and charged with racketeering conspiracy, drug trafficking, and multiple violent offenses under the RICO Act. The case against him was overwhelming. Wiretaps, confidential informants, and cooperating witnesses painted a picture of a gang steeped in violence and criminal enterprise, with Haywood playing a central role. He was convicted and sentenced to life in federal prison. Prosecutors described him as one of the most dangerous gang members ever to operate in Wilmington. For the families torn apart by bomb squad violence, justice had finally been served. Today, Eugene Haywood sits behind bars, serving out his life sentence in a high-security federal prison. His name remains infamous in Wilmington, both feared and remembered by those who lived through the reign of the bomb squad. His life serves as a grim reminder of how the streets can shape young men into soldiers of destruction, and how gang life, while offering a sense of identity and power, often ends in tragedy and loss. The story of Eugene Haywood is not just about crime. It's about the deeper issues of poverty, neglect, and broken communities. It is a cautionary tale for future generations, a stark example of what happens when hope is replaced by violence and potential is consumed by the streets. The life of Terrence Andress, a tragic journey through crime, trauma, and justice. Terrence Andress was a man whose life became a haunting example of how childhood trauma, mental illness, and a broken justice system can converge with tragic consequences. Born in Texas in 1988, Andress grew up in a world defined by chaos, abandonment, and violence. His early life was anything but stable. His mother struggled with drug addiction and frequently left him and his siblings to fend for themselves. By the time Andress was a teenager, he had been in and out of foster care and juvenile detention. Andress's childhood was marked by deep psychological wounds. He witnessed violence in the home, experienced neglect, and endured periods of homelessness and hunger. These traumas led to severe depression and mental illness, conditions that were largely ignored by the systems meant to protect him. As a teenager, he began to spiral. He got involved in low-level crime and eventually landed in the juvenile justice system, where he reported being medicated with heavy antipsychotics and kept in isolation for months at a time. In 2008, at the age of 20, Terrence Andress committed a double murder during a carjacking attempt in the parking lot of a Kroger grocery store in Fort Bend County, Texas. The crime shocked the community. Andress, high on drugs and emotionally unbalanced, shot and killed 2 people in what prosecutors described as a cold-blooded act of violence. He was arrested, tried, and sentenced to death. But the case of Terrence Andress didn't end there. During his trial, his defense attorneys failed to present crucial evidence about his background, his horrific childhood, mental illness, and emotional instability. For years, activists and legal advocates argued that Andress's life was a textbook case of how untreated trauma and systemic neglect can lead to violent outcomes. In 2020, the U.S. Supreme Court agreed. In a rare decision, the court ruled that Andress had received ineffective legal counsel and sent the case back to the Texas courts for reconsideration. However, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals later reinstated his death sentence, defying the Supreme Court's guidance. The legal whiplash left many wondering if justice had truly been served, or if the system had failed again, this time more publicly. In January 2023, while still on death row in Texas, Terrence Andress died by suicide. He was just 34 years old. His death closed a long and painful chapter in a life shaped by suffering and struggle. Terrence Andress's story is not one that excuses violence, but one that forces society to ask hard questions. How many more lives will be lost to untreated trauma? How many more young people will fall through the cracks before real reform is made? His case exposed the human cost of a criminal justice system that too often punishes the broken instead of helping them heal. And in that truth, his life becomes more than just a headline. It becomes a warning. The life of Darius Aderhold. Darius Aderhold's life is a tale shaped by hardship, survival, and the unforgiving environment of America's inner cities. Born in Newark, New Jersey in the early 1990s, Darius grew up in one of the most dangerous and economically depressed neighborhoods in the state. The streets where he played as a child were littered with crime, poverty, and gang violence, a reality that would eventually consume his life. Raised by a single mother, Darius struggled to find stability. His father was largely absent, and the lack of a strong male figure left a vacuum quickly filled by the local street gangs. By the time he was a teenager, Aderhold had already been arrested for minor offenses, and he was quickly gaining a reputation for being both fearless and strategic. He eventually aligned himself with the Bloods, a powerful and violent gang with deep roots in New Jersey. Within a few short years, Darius was no longer just another foot soldier. He was rising through the ranks. What set Aderhold apart from many of his peers was his intelligence and ability to organize. While others focused on street-level drug sales and turf wars, Darius began building networks that stretched beyond the city. He forged connections in Pennsylvania, New York, and even the southern states. With this broader influence came more power and more violence. Law enforcement agencies began tracking his movements, linking him to multiple drug trafficking operations, shootings, and even allegations of orchestrating hits from behind the scenes. In 2015, after years of investigation, the law finally caught up with him. Darius Aderhold was indicted on federal charges, including racketeering, drug conspiracy, and weapons violations. The case against him was massive, supported by wiretaps, undercover recordings, and testimonies from former associates who turned state's evidence. Prosecutors painted a picture of Aderhold as a criminal mastermind who used fear and loyalty to control entire communities. At trial, Darius remained stoic. He denied any involvement in the most serious allegations, claiming he had long since left the gang lifestyle behind. However, the jury wasn't convinced. In 2017, he was convicted and sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. For many, it marked the end of a violent chapter, but for some in Newark, Aderhold was still seen as a symbol of rebellion against a system that had failed them. Today, Darius Aderhold remains incarcerated in a high-security federal facility. His story is one of wasted potential and the tragic consequences of systemic neglect, broken homes, and the lure of street power. He could have been a leader in his community, a businessman, or even a mentor. Instead, his name became synonymous with Newark's gang wars of the 2000s and 2010s. His rise and fall stand as a stark reminder of the fine line between ambition and destruction in America's urban battlegrounds. The life of Daniel Christopher Allen of the Aryan Circle. Daniel Christopher Allen was a name that became synonymous with violence, loyalty, and white supremacist ideology. Born in Texas in the late 1970s, Allen would grow up in an environment marked by instability, crime, and racial division. Like many who would later join prison gangs, he was a product of a broken system, one that offered few chances and even fewer exits. By his early 20s, Allen found himself behind bars, convicted on drug and weapons charges. It was in the Texas prison system, one of the most violent in the nation, that Allen was introduced to the Aryan Circle, a white supremacist prison gang that had splintered from the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas in the 1980s. The group was founded to promote white racial identity, power, and control, both inside prison walls and on the streets. Daniel Allen quickly rose through the ranks, earning a reputation for brutality, discipline, and unwavering loyalty to the Aryan Circle. He became a shot caller, issuing orders for hits, extortion, and drug trafficking within the prison system. His leadership style was direct and ruthless, enforcing strict codes of conduct and using violence to maintain control. But Allen's influence wasn't confined to the penitentiary. After his release, he became instrumental in expanding the Aryan Circle's operations beyond prison, overseeing methamphetamine distribution, weapons trafficking, and collecting taxes from smaller white gangs in rural Texas and the Deep South. He operated in the shadows, evading law enforcement while maintaining tight control over his soldiers. In 2016, Allen's criminal empire began to unravel. Federal investigators launched a sweeping operation targeting Aryan Circle leadership. Through wiretaps, undercover agents, and flipped insiders, authorities built a case that would expose the inner workings of the gang. Allen was arrested in a high-profile sting operation and indicted on charges including racketeering, drug trafficking, and conspiracy to commit murder. In court, prosecutors painted Allen as a key figure in a violent criminal enterprise, linking him to orders for multiple assaults and killings. Witnesses testified about his involvement in gang-led murders, both inside prison and on the outside. He was ultimately convicted and sentenced to life in federal prison. Today, Daniel Christopher Allen resides in a maximum security facility under heavy restrictions, a fallen leader in a gang that continues to operate despite federal crackdowns. His life is a cautionary tale of hate, power, and the corrupting influence of gang loyalty. Through Allen's story, we witness the dark allure of prison gangs, how they recruit, manipulate, and ultimately destroy the lives of men caught in their grasp. And in the echoes of his downfall, we're reminded of the deep-seated racial divisions and systemic failures that allow such gangs to thrive. This is the life and legacy of Daniel Christopher Allen, a man forged in hate, a soldier of the Aryan Circle, and a warning of the violence that still simmers beneath the surface of America's prisons. The life of Melvin Canales Salana. Melvin Canales Salana was once a name whispered in fear across the streets of El Salvador and parts of the United States. As a high-ranking member of MS-13, also known as La Mara Salvatrucha, Saldana's life embodied the brutality, loyalty, and terror associated with one of the most violent street gangs in the world. Born in El Salvador during the height of civil war and political unrest, Melvin grew up in a world plagued by poverty, instability, and violence. As a teenager, he was lured into the ranks of MS-13, a gang that originally formed in Los Angeles during the 1980s by Salvadoran immigrants. By the 1990s and 2000s, the gang had expanded back into Central America, and El Salvador became one of its most brutal battlegrounds. Salana quickly rose through the ranks, proving himself to be ruthless, strategic, and completely devoted to the gang's cause. Known by his street name El Cholo, he was a feared enforcer and later a key commander within the organization. He operated out of the Soyapango region, one of MS-13's most fortified strongholds, and became responsible for overseeing extortion, drug trafficking, and targeted assassinations. His reputation was built on terror. He ordered the killings of rival Barrio 18 members, directed attacks on police officers, and enforced internal discipline through executions and torture. Under Saldana's leadership, MS-13 cells expanded their control over neighborhoods, extorting local businesses and eliminating anyone who stood in their way. But Saldana's influence wasn't limited to El Salvador. He maintained communication with MS-13 cliques in the United States, coordinating drug shipments and laundering money through transnational networks. Authorities believed he was instrumental in bridging gang operations between Central America and cities like Los Angeles, Houston, and Washington, D.C. His power made him a high-value target for Salvadoran and U.S. law enforcement. In 2016, following years of intelligence gathering and surveillance, Salana was arrested in a joint operation by Salvadoran police and the U.S. FBI. He was charged with a range of crimes, including organized conspiracy, murder, and international drug trafficking. Salana's arrest was hailed as a major blow to MS-13's leadership. But even from behind bars, reports suggest he continued to influence gang operations, sending coded messages to street-level cliques and participating in decision-making from prison. Melvin Canales. Salana's life is a stark reflection of a generation lost to violence. A product of war, poverty, and systemic failure, he transformed into a kingpin of chaos. His story highlights the brutal grip MS-13 has held over communities for decades, and the ongoing challenge governments face in dismantling its reach. This is the story of Melvin Canales Salana. From street soldier to gang commander, his legacy is etched in blood, a life consumed by the world of MS-13. A reminder that where poverty and violence meet, gangs continue to rise, and the consequences can echo across borders.